अस्सलाम वालेकुम। अलीगढ़ मुस्लिम यूनिवर्सिटी की देरीना रवायत के मुताबिक और अलीगढ़ अलमनाई एसोसिएशन वाशिंगटन डीसी की रवायत के मुताबिक इस प्रोग्राम का बाकायदगी से आगाज़ कुरान पाक की तिलावत से होगा। औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम, बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम। इक़रा बिस्मि रब्बिकल्लज़ी खलक़, खलक़ल इंसान मिन अलक़, इक़रा व रब्बुकुमुल अकरम, अल्लज़ी अल्लम बिल क़लम, अल्लमल इंसान मा लम यअलम। सदक़ल्लाहुल अज़ीम। मत सहल इन्हें जानो फिरता है फलक बरसों, मत सहल इन्हें जानो फिरता है फलक बरसों, तब खाक के पर्दे से इंसान निकलते हैं। Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C., I'm your host, Afzal Usmani, and I'm also president of the Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. I would like to welcome you all on this annual Sir Syed Memorial Lecture 2020. It's my pleasure to welcome you all, and especially we have our guest speaker, Professor Pankaj Chandra. We'll talk about him more in coming time. Let me introduce you Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. This is one of the oldest alumni association outside of Indian subcontinent, which was established in 1975, exactly after 100 years of the establishment of Madrasatul Ulum, which was established in May 1875, which later became Mohammedan Anglo-Oriental College in 1877, and it became Aligarh Muslim University in 1920. Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. is a social, cultural, and educational, non-political, and non-profit organization operating in the D.C. metropolitan area since 1975. Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. is running many social, cultural, and educational programs, and I'm just going to give you a glimpse of that one. We are annually distributing more than 300 endowed scholarship in Aligarh Muslim University every year. We are supporting more than 10 to 15 feeder institutions, small institution, coaching centers, schools in different parts of the country across India, especially Assam, Gorakhpur, Faizabad, Azamgarh, Shikohabad, and many other places. And annually, we organize this Sir Syed Day Memorial Lecture, or which we call it Sir Syed Memorial Lecture. And the lectures have been given by many eminent scholars and speakers, including Professor David Leleveld, Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool, Raza Rumi, and many other likewise. And also, Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. is known for promotion of Urdu Mushara in Northern America. Especially, they started this this process in 1975 from the beginning, and they continued. And in mid-80s, they started international Mushara every year, and they do. And we all know that they've been doing it for that long time. Especially this year, which is a centennial year of Aligarh Muslim University. And we all know that Aligarh Muslim University became a central university in 1920. So we are completing 100 years of its establishment. So as a part of the celebration, we are going to have Mushara with Legends on 31st October. And I'm going to just name the participating poets. They are legend poets, including eminent Aligarhian Munibur Rahman Saab, Javed Akhtar Saab, Zahra Nigah, Amjad Islam Amjad, Takhar Arif, and Pirzada Qasim, and of course, our own Dr. Abdullah Saab. We also do annually Independence Day Kavi Sammelan and Urdu Mushara collectively in the DC metropolitan area to promote Hindi and Urdu culture, language culture and poetry culture in the DC metropolitan area. And we are doing it for more than 10 years without a break. We are not a part of the relief organization, but as this year was very special, and we all know that how India and rest of the world got affected with the COVID-19 problems, especially India also, because this is our motherland. So most of us belong to India. So we went out of basically deviated from our main trajectory, and we did a relief work also in different parts of India, including Aligarh, Faizabad, Calcutta, Assam, Gorakhpur, and different, wherever we find good context, we find a legal channel, we try to provide relief work to different parts of the community. And we are blessed basically with us that this is one of the oldest organization of AMU alumni outside of Indian subcontinent, and we have been operating from 1975, and some of our founding members are still with us, like Dr. Abdullah Saab, Tariq Farooqi, Farzana Pa, Aftab Ansari Saab, and many others. And it's sorry to let you know that our founding president, Syed Ahmed Saab, who died very recently in April 2020, and we definitely miss him. Otherwise, he was very actively involved with the association. I will not take much time of you. This is a brief introduction of Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C., and we'll move on to other programs of the day. And once again, I would like to welcome you all on behalf of on my personal behalf and on behalf of the Aligarh Alumni Association to this Sir Syed Memorial Lecture. And after this, I will request Dr. Muhammad Akbar to take the program to the next level. Dr. Muhammad Akbar.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are living. I am Muhammad Akbar, President-elect of the Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. As a part of this Aligarh Muslim University Centennial Celebrations, Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. would like to honor our healthcare workers for their phenomenal services to the community in light of the COVID-19 pandemic and to present them with a certificate of appreciation. The recipient of these awards were selected from the dedicated volunteers of the Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. community and their immediate family members, friends, and well-wishers of Aligarh Muslim University. Congratulations. Here is the sample of the certificate of appreciation that will be awarded to our dedicated healthcare workers. Now, it is my pleasure to read out the names of the recipients along with showing their picture and their specialization in the following slide. In addition to individual recipients, we have several recipients belonging to the same family, including siblings, mother and daughter, wife and husband, son and mother. So here is the siblings. Dr. Sharmeen Rafat Hussain, surgery. Dr. Azam Syed Hussain, resident. Dr. Muhammad Zulfiqar Ali, infectious disease. Dr. Muhammad Manzoor Ali, infectious disease. Next we have mother and daughter. Dr. Tahura Khaja, internal medicine. Dr. Mona Kaleem, ophthalmology. Mrs. Nasreen Khan, senior OTR. Mrs. Iram S. Khan, healthcare worker. Now we have wife and husband. Dr. Atiya Khan, pediatrics. Dr. Tariq Khan, emergency medicine. Dr. Sineya Ayub, surgery. Dr. Adam Chadwick, anesthesiology. After that, we have individual recipients. Dr. Sofia Abdullah, OBG. Dr. Syed Zaidi, internal medicine. Dr. Matthew Robinson, infectious disease. Dr. Ahmed Masood, internal medicine. Dr. Rana Ali, pulmonology. Dr. Muhammad Maz, resident anesthesiology. Dr. Fahad Umar, pulmonology. Dr. Mustafa A. Haq, orthopedics. Dr. Azjad M. Khan, pulmonology. Mr. Syed Mustafa Ali Hashmi, respiratory care. Mrs. Natasha Raziuddin, senior PA. And finally, Mrs. Saima Khamar, family nurse practitioner, board certified. In addition to that, we have other recipients who could not make due to some personal reasons are Dr. Muhammad Shoaib Abdulaziz, Dr. Mohsina Usmani, Dr. Hamad Usmani, Mrs. Hira Usmani, Mrs. Saima Khamar, Ms. Mona Arshad. Once again, congratulations to all recipients of this award, and we wish and hope that you will continue to serve humanity with dedication and professionalism and make our alma mater proud in the process. Thank you all.
Thank you, Akbar Bhai, for this. And once again, on behalf of the association, I would like to appreciate and basically recognize all those individuals, family who worked tirelessly and selflessly during the pandemic. And once again, congratulations for appreciation. Of course, it is just a token of appreciation, and we will mail the certificate to your postal address because of this pandemic thing. Otherwise, we could have a physical event and then we could have handed over personally. But anyway, we will mail the things. So continue the program now. We will not take much of the time. And as you know that our keynote speaker, Dr. Pankaj Chandra, is among us, and I'd like to welcome him again. And I will request one of our very active volunteer and member of the association, Mrs. Nasreen Khan, to please come and introduce Dr. Pankaj Chandra. Nasreen Khan.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. It is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Pankaj Chandra. Dr. Pankaj Chandra is on a mission to create the best liberal art interdisciplinary research institute university in India as the Vice Chancellor of Ahmedabad University. Dr. Chandra has BTech from Banaras University and he did PhD from the Wharton School of Business in US. He has worldwide experience in education and had taught at world premier institutes such as McGill University in Canada, Cornell University in US, and Indian Institute of Management Bangalore and Indian Institute of Management Ahmedabad. Many of us and our children have benefited from the multidisciplinary education offered in the United States, and Dr. Chandra has taken the initiative to bring the similar approach to our motherland. Instead of focusing purely on book smarts, Dr. Chandra focuses on teaching young people not just what to learn, but how to learn in today's uncertain and fast-paced environment. What sets Dr. Chandra apart is not just his focus on multidisciplinary education, but also his spotlight on experimental learning, which we call learning by doing. He was a part of founding team at the Center of Innovation, Incubation, Entrepreneurship at Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, and served as its first chairperson. Dr. Chandra has established himself as a thought leader in the field of education. His recent book title, Building University That Matters, studies issues of governance, change, and institution building in Indian universities. At a time when universities in India are being critiqued for underachievement, Dr. Chandra built a case for redesigning of the university as an organization. We are gathered today in honor of Sir Syed, who also had a vision for improving India's education system and laid the foundation of Aligarh Muslim University. And we are reaping the benefit from his vision. In a similar vein, we hope educational leader like Dr. Chandra can continue to improve the educational system of our motherland. Undoubtedly, since Sir Syed time, the world is much different place. To understand how this impacts Indian education system, Dr. Chandra is honoring us with today's talk title, How Indian University Have Evolved Over the Past 100 Years. It is my honor and privilege to welcome Dr. Pankaj Chandra to enlighten us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Nasreen Appa. I will just interject as part of our tradition of the Legal Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. We always, every year, the speaker for Sir Syed Memorial Lecture, we honor a plaque of appreciation for their services. And this year, because of the COVID, you're not here, so we'll just read the plaque and share with the screen, and we'll mail the physical plaque to your address. So, Masood Bhai, can you share the plaque? So, Legal Alumni Association, Washington, D.C. This is Sir Syed Ahmad Khan Award presented to Professor Pankaj Chandra for his admirable leadership, excellence in teaching and research, and his contributions to higher education in India. On the occasion of Sir Syed Memorial Lecture, October 18th, 2020, signed by Afzal Usmani, President, Executive Council, and Masood Farshori, Chairman, Board of Trustee. And I would like Pankaj Chandra Sahab to please accept this plaque virtually, and we will mail the plaque physically via mail. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for for the plaque, and thank you very much, Nasrin ji, for your very kind introduction. Good morning to all of you in the US. Good evening to those who are joining in India. Afzal Usmani Saab, Masood Farshori Saab, Muhammad Akbar Saab, and my friend Shahid Jamil Saab, and the alumni of the great university at Aligarh. I bring greetings from the university at Ahmedabad. Thank you very much for inviting me to deliver this year's Sir Syed Memorial Lecture. सबसे पहले तो आपको अलीगढ़ मुस्लिम यूनिवर्सिटी की 100वीं सालगिरह मुबारक.
Thank you.
You are the inheritors of an amazing tradition of a great university and the far-sighted vision of Sir Syed, who set up the college that became the university. Universities are built over decades and they last for centuries. And AMU is a testament to the faith of the nation and its people in the value of education. So congratulations. First, on a very personal note, both the universities at Aligarh and Banaras have had, which is my alma mater, have had great literary and theater traditions. The year was 1980. I was a student of engineering at BHU, and we had invited AMU for our first National Cultural Festival. We were performing the great playwright Badal Sarkar's play Bhoma under our director Nalin Jain, who perhaps is listening to this conversation today. AMU staged the play Riots to a standing ovation of about 3,000 students and won everybody's hearts. We sang AMU's Tarana and BHU's Kulgeet together. I do remember meeting Parvez and Sabah from AMU, the leads on that play, once again at a similar festival in Allahabad, and their warmth made me feel immensely richer. This talk is also remembering and expressing my gratitude to those lost friends from AMU who visited us at BHU 40 years ago. That, ladies and gentlemen, is what university education is about to me. It is about building shared values and celebrating them together. I'm not a historian. I'm also not a sociologist of education or a political scientist who can theorize about the state and university entanglements. I'm a professor of management, and my world is organizations. And I see university as an organization in a broader national and global ecology. Having run institutions, both public and private, the issue of governance and organizations is very salient to me, and one that I feel is crucial to address at this particular juncture in our history. Governance is the glue that ensures what goals will be achieved, but more importantly, how. Its impact on lives of students and academics is deep. Its impact on the future of education is deeper. Today, I would like to talk about the long arc of institutional governance in India and how the society and higher educational institutions in India have shaped their engagement with each other. But first, permit me to deviate for a few minutes and talk to you about what in my mind are the three purposes of education, as it will form the backdrop of my talk today. The first purpose of education must be to imbibe the constitutional obligation of every citizen of a nation. A highly educated society shows high respect for the laws of the land, high regard for freedoms of others, high tolerance for diversity and difference, high desire for peace, and is more giving to those less endowed. Higher education is special. This is because of its privilege. The beneficiaries are called to occupy positions of responsibility in society. They are expected to lead the society into social engagements, supposed to be constitutionally rich, morally appropriate, politically enlightened, and scientifically advanced. Education is supposed to build faculties that allow us to develop very nuanced and reflective positions on issues that a society faces. As we go along this evening, I will let you decide for yourself how have our institutions in India done on this count. With regard to preparing the youth for livelihood, which is the second purpose of education, we may not have necessarily done very well, although we have probably fared much better than on the count of citizenship. When a society's brightest start to choose vocations that do not suit their passion, but instead suit the forces of the market, the chances of mismatch, especially at the upper end of the skills, become quite real. The country appears to have become too formal. Dr. Shahid Jamil, who's here, can confirm, but my hunch is
Masood Bhai is freezing.
Yeah, I think we lost him. The connection, there should be some issue with connection.
Are we okay?
It's freezing, Pankaj Saab.
Oh,
Hopefully it will be fine.
all right. Are we, at least you're able to hear me?
Yeah, now
Okay.
it's good. It's
Okay,
good now.
perfect.
Yeah,
Perfect,
go
perfect.
back. Please continue.
The third purpose of education is even more sophisticated in its value. And that is to help find one's lifelong passion for learning and one's own meaning in that life. Education is supposed to help build a reflective mind that tries to discover from the world of books, dialogues, engagement, and work of experts a passion to fold diverse perspectives within one's own book of mind, heart, and values. Experiences induced by the campus and the reflection arising out of such experiences are supposed to help an individual to think deeply about herself, her relationship with the lifelong quest for knowledge and discovery of the self. To these three, let me add a fourth purpose also, as a response to these times in which we are living, by quoting from the book Invisible Cities by the Italian writer Italo Calvino. And he says, and I quote, "The inferno of the living is not something that will be, if there is one. It is what is already here, the inferno where we live every day, that we form by being together." There are two ways to escape suffering it. The first is easy for many. Accept the inferno and become such a part of it that you can no longer see it. The second is risky and demands constant vigilance and apprehension. Seek and learn to recognize who and what in the midst of inferno are not inferno. Then make them endure, give them space. End of quote. The purpose of education is also to identify who is not an inferno and protect them from becoming one. Did the Indian higher education live up to these purposes over the last 100 years? Let me now structure the rest of this talk in two parts. First, let me trace how we have fared institutionally during three phases: the pre-independence period, the remaining years of the 20th century, that is from 1947 to 2000, and then the early 21st century. In terms of what did we achieve, what did we miss, and what have been their implications. Then I will raise one troubling question that must be addressed for higher education in India to become one that will matter in times to come. The pre-independent India was a difficult yet very foundational period for higher education in India. First, there were social visionaries like Sir Syed, who saw in modern education as a way to eradicate backwardness, poverty, and to build an independent mind. A few more stand out. Rabindranath Tagore at Shantiniketan wanted global fusion of learning. Mahamana Madan Mohan Malviya and Sir Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan at BHU, who were trying to build the foundations of an Indian model of education that combined sciences, technology, and the learning of arts, ancient languages, and even traditional Indian medicines. Then there was V.K.R.V. Rao at the Ahmedabad Education Society, the trust that found Ahmedabad University, who was building contemporary disciplines like commerce and pharmacy in early 1930s. And so was Sir M. Visheshwaraya, who was laying the foundation of engineering education across the country, and particularly in Mysore and Bangalore. While there are many distinctive characteristics of this period, let me point to a few that would have an impact on higher education later. At the turn of the 20th century, there were 5 universities and about 25 colleges across the country. They were largely designed on the patterns of the universities and colleges of Oxford, Cambridge, and London. At that time, higher education was largely for children of the social and economic elite. As more universities and colleges were started between 1900 and 1947, the enrollment also grew, but its elitist character remained. In these early years, most institutions were graduating students for the service of the British government departments and the government's civil services. Organizationally, university hierarchy was very clearly defined. It was also very simple, but a bit rigid. Institutions were often headed by British academics and bureaucrats, or non-academics who were tall social leaders. The university court, comprising tall representatives of the society, was installed as its highest body to create linkages with and oversight from the society at large. While responsible to provincial governors, enough space and freedom existed for founders to manage affairs of the university. Resources were largely being raised privately at all institutions, public and private, and most were run by private trusts and donors. Autonomy in governance to universities and colleges was higher. The University of Calcutta, imagine, could give a BA degree for mathematics. V.V. Narlikar could be hired as a full professor and head department of mathematics at BHU in 1932 at the age of 24. Try that today. Many celebrated teachers taught at colleges like Jadunath Sarkar, the famous historian at Ravenshaw College, Cuttack, C.F. Andrews at St. Stephen's, or P.C. Mahalanobis at Presidency in Calcutta. And they inspired a generation of undergraduates. It's rare to find such scholars in undergraduate colleges today. This period also saw the establishment of a University of London style affiliation system, where colleges and universities were affiliated to the few established universities who would conduct examinations. This grew into a monster in later years. Very influential educational institutions that would go on to build a distinctive culture and scholarship which would shape India's freedom struggle were found during this period. They included universities like AMU, BHU, Lucknow, Patna, Andhra, Vishwabharati, Osmania, etc. And colleges like Ferguson in Pune, Wilson, Elphinstone, St. Xavier's in Bombay, Loyola in Chennai, Agra College, Baroda College, Christ Church in Kanpur, Presidency and St. Xavier's in Calcutta, Stephens, Hindu and Ramjas in Delhi, Cotton College in Guwahati, Khalsa College in Amritsar. Unfortunately, many of these great institutions would lose their original glory over time. This was also the period when Indian science was at its best. It was global and very cutting edge. At the same time, politics on campus was largely driven by the independence movement. And lastly, the academics of faculty on these times were really different from those later. More on that later today. And then came the independence, followed by a constitution. Fazal Rizvi, in his paper titled The Challenges of Modernization in Higher Education, puts it very well that Indian constitution can be understood to reflect the aspiration of an independent nation that seeks a path which winds through the modern values of republicanism, individual rights, and secularism with a commitment to social welfare and justice, as well as many of India's distinctive traditions. That this reconciliation would be long drawn and uneasy was to be expected, given the lengthy debates on constitutional philosophy. But the political class in the coming years did not see the economic and social progress of the nation as its own journey towards modernity, and that which included science and technology as the new theory of development, thereby leading to the project of education coming to a grinding halt. While it grew in terms of numbers, it stagnated in terms of its distinctive philosophy. Society was made suspicious of modernity as an attempt to subjugate our thinking. Several questions come to my mind at this moment. Why have our universities not managed to maintain the balance between the various purposes of education, that is citizenship, vocation, and love for learning? What made our universities give up the grounds of excellence that they had built in the early years of the 20th century? The post-independent period, the period between 1947 and 2000, perhaps has been the most traumatic period for higher education until recently. It appeared that education got a real break between 1947 and up to 1970. It had a washout period between 1970 and 1990 and was swept away by the post-liberalization period till 2000 and beyond. When India gained independence in 1947, the nation had a total of 241,369 students, 2,41,000 students, registered across 20 universities and 496 colleges. The gross enrollment ratio, or GER, was 0.5%. Of all the eligible people who could have gone to university, 0.5% went. The nation had to be built, and education was the aspiration of the growing population. The University Education Commission was set up by Maulana Azad in 1948 to increase access to quality higher education. By year 2000, enrollment grew from 2 lakhs to 8 million in about 256 universities and 13,000 colleges with a GER of 10%, above 0.5. This rapid growth was fueled by enrollment from the middle class and the demands of business, industry, and the government. This period also saw the growth of private institutions, mostly run by people in power, and many of whom saw this as a business proposition. The private started seeking and getting subsidies from the government for running their institutions. Private donors at public institutions also shrank, and they became fully dependent on the government. This led to an increase in regulation and control by the government. The refrain was that academia could not be left to academics, but the government and the bureaucrats felt comfortable leaving it in the hands of those who did not understand its ethos. This paved the way for a complete sarkarikaran, or bureaucratization of higher education in India. It had 3 characteristics. One, the bureaucrats took full control of the running of the institutions by defining every process therein, from the process of hiring of faculty to criteria for admissions, to appointment of vice chancellors, to determination of governing structures, to curriculum, to rigid heads under which grants could be used, to processes for growth and rejuvenation, and also how surpluses at an institution could be used. 2, the only way to control large number of institutions was to standardize the processes and the ways of doing things at all institutions. All had to become similar in every way, thereby destroying what was distinctive about each of the great institutions of India. This slide started in 1950s and continues to date. And 3, academics in higher education were to be treated like de facto public servants, and all rules and regulations of the government were applicable. This smoked innovation out of university governance. This standardization also removed all flexibility in admissions and appointments that brought very valuable people to campuses in early years. Universities had come to resemble government offices. Departments at universities were made to create walls around themselves and prevent anyone from other disciplines to partake of its knowledge, if there was any. Departments became insular, and universities were unable to solve big puzzles of society because they required knowledge systems from many disciplines to be deployed together. But the departments were insular. One of the biggest changes that took place at universities post-1970s was in the characteristic of its faculty. By late 1960s, the faculty from the previous era had started to retire. That generation was working towards the idea of India. They were idiosyncratic, but intellectually powerful. They were indulgent in an argument, but never compromising. They were thoughtful, compassionate, nurturing, and very austere. They rode bicycles and wore thin metal rings around the shin to stop their trousers from getting caught in the bicycle chains. This is one of the most enduring memories of the generation of academic thinkers from the 1960s in my mind. They addressed difficult issues facing India and possessed a thorough understanding of Indian philosophy and spirituality, irrespective of their political leanings and scientific training. They had a great command over the vernacular as well as over English, And if they were in the northern part of our country, they also spoke and wrote Urdu. The professors of English were also great national poets in Hindi, Kannada, Urdu, Odia, or Bengali. The professors of science were great scholars of archaeology and history. Some of those who taught engineering or mathematics wrote about music. There was breadth to their learning that gave an unusual depth to their scholarship. Time was their own, and they gave it freely to teaching and to their students. They taught new and difficult topics, but never compromised by making them easy. They were surrounded by inspired students. Sometimes they also paid their students tuition from their own stretched salaries. As they retired by late 60s, they were replaced by more focused individuals who saw academic growth as one of influence and power and authority. Such would be people who would get to the helm of academia in the country in 3 decades from 1960s. Imagine a number of universities being led by politically connected people who are not intellectually significant. Academic leadership is unique as it is premised on influencing without using authority. The wise leaders of the pre-independent era were replaced by leaders who could follow instructions and do as they were told by bureaucrats and politicians. It created a new breed of sycophantic and bureaucratic vice chancellors who were more authoritarian. Many did not have the capabilities to connect with faculty or students as stakeholders. The distance between these leaders and the stakeholders at the universities grew, and the void was filled by wily registrars of politically opportunistic faculty. Meetings at universities became meaningless and stormy. Universities resisted changes to meet the requirements of time. The affiliation system that had started in the previous era also became a real monster. For instance, University of Mumbai has 700 colleges affiliated to it. How can you change anything at these colleges or at Mumbai University? Centralization led universities to shrink their purpose to simply preparing manpower for industry, that too of minimal quality. And the latter led to a forsaking of the love for learning, a purpose of education. This was also a period where the state's emphasis moved away from the universities into standalone institutions for teaching and research. We saw growth of single or limited discipline institutions like the IITs, IIMs, national law schools, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, architecture schools, as well as various research institutions that were set up outside the universities. This deprived the universities of precious new resources, as well as trained people, as well as an opportunity to become leaders in research and innovation. One only has to go and see the state of libraries and laboratories at our institutions, and especially at state institutions, to understand this predicament. New central universities were started, but they were largely catering to students only in the region where faculty from only from that region, with faculty from that region as well. National integration, which was a very valuable outcome of attending a university, was lost. Ramchand Guha has argued that Indian universities have been undermined from above and corrupted and corroded by the forces of parochialism and populism. He points out that the chauvinism of the linguistic states and regionalism effectively destroyed the pluralism that must characterize universities if they are to remain intellectually vibrant. as this cachet of professional schools grew post 1950s, their graduates could get jobs very easily. The arts and sciences, which attracted the highest enrollment and continue to do so, were no longer in demand by industry. One often wonders if the state of mind in India today is a function of this push for professional education at the cost of citizenship thinking that comes through engagement with humanities and social sciences. Post-independence, universities became a platform for development as they lay on the axis of change. The nation-building fervor had led many a bright young people to join academics as profession in the 1930s and 40s. A growing demand led to an expansion in the undergraduate college system in 50s onwards, and to the setting up of new universities, which continues to date. Departments in existing universities and colleges thinned out. Requirements were reduced to get bright young people to become academics, but many stayed only for short periods before moving on to more persuasive opportunities in civil services or the nascent private sector, each for different reasons. They were replaced with more agreeable young people with lower academic preparation. This expansion has had another deleterious effect. There has been exit of quality talent from Indian academia. There was also a third force at play around this time. The society outside the universities was also changing intensely, and its influence on the university was negatively centripetal. Political parties started to see universities as preparatory grounds for their profession, not in terms of building experts, but as small-time political leaders who would do the bidding for regional politicians, hired hands who had a negative influence on the functioning of the institution. This lumpenization of campus life was very different from the participation of students in various movements, like the Naxal movement of the late 60s or the anti-emergency movement of the 70s. It is common to see student leaders pressure university administration to admit students with low marks or pass students who had failed, but rarely have there been protests on poor quality of teaching. It was also the emergency of 1975 that drove a deep wedge between institutions and the government, where the former's expression of angst was seen as unlawful and had to be dealt as a law and order situation. Police would regularly encamp universities in that era. The destruction of quality in higher education was complete. It was under these conditions that Indian higher education entered the 21st century. Today, the enrollment stands at 34.5 million students across 1,000 universities and around 52,000 colleges with a gross enrollment ratio of 24%. What sense can we make out of it? First, most institutions are single or limited discipline institution with an average enrollment of 600 per institution. In these times, when complex problems require deployment of knowledge from multiple disciplines at the same time, most of these institutions are unable to address them. Two, while many of our standalone institutions are regarded very well with the collection of high caliber researchers and teachers and students, most universities remain under an intellectual eclipse. They are over-regulated and under-resourced. Three, institutional autonomy is at an all-time low. It has been progressively been destroyed over the last 20 years. Today, it is the courts that have started to decide how should a graduating class be evaluated and promoted in the face of this pandemic crisis. I always thought that that was within the purview of the university. Academia is under stress. The government of one color used to send intelligence bureau officers at academic conferences and required institutions to seek permission from it to invite scholars from around the world at conferences in order to sort out who was talking rubbish. The government of another color is so afraid of academics that it has intensified its attack on them and charges them and imprisons them at the slight pretext. One wonders, what social science can you teach in such an environment? What is the role of an academic as a public intellectual today? Academic institutions are organizational forms that require a governance environment that balances academic freedom with accountability through a process of participative decision-making. This balance can be very easily disturbed by extreme positions. An aggressive and control-driven leadership, or a board, or the sponsor would turn the other stakeholders hostile and destabilize this fine balance. Similarly, an institutional agenda driven by self-preservation of faculty and staff creates permanent fissures. What makes this governance system so vulnerable to an imbalance in this relationship? Academic governance works on the principles of mutual persuasion, low demarcation of academic and administrative roles, and the primacy of merit in ideas and actions. And most important, an aspiration towards self-regulation. An overreach by any stakeholder violates these principles, destroys the ability to dialogue, weakens the appreciation that is required to run institutions. It appears that this balance has been severely shaken in the Indian higher education scenario. Amongst all of this, there appears to be a thin sliver of hope. This last decade has also seen the establishment of a new generation of private universities whose ethos and intent reminds me of the private institutions and founders of the earlier 20th century India. Syed and I belong to two such institutions. Perhaps these institutions and the governance model supported by private philanthropy can show the way to rejuvenate higher education in India and also its much needed public institutions. However, the jury is still out on them, and we will see how much autonomy they will be allowed by the state and what they will do with it. One would be amiss if we don't mention the National Education Policy of 2020, which reflects a clear shift in an articulation of what education must be in the 21st century and what will be its drivers. Interestingly, it celebrates the multidisciplinary integrative university and argues for standalone institutions to become one. Its implementation, however, will require dismantling of all the powers and structures which have prevented existing great institutions to become a pale shadow of the past. And that is its biggest challenge. Let me conclude by posing the one question that has troubled Indian higher education for several decades now. The big question in Indian higher education is about who makes choices and decisions regarding higher education. Who makes choices and decisions regarding higher education? Several questions are embedded in that one big question. Who selects its stakeholders? Who judges what is to be taught and how? Who judges what is its quality in education? Who funds and who pays for education and how much? Should those who fund higher education make academic choices, including the choice of a leader? Should faculty in public institutions be considered as public servants? How should we ring fence the institution from the powers of the day, whether it is the government or anyone else? And lastly, does it matter to anyone if university or a college goes under or underperforms? Towards that, what is the role of the alumni of an institution? I'll repeat once again. Towards that, what is the role of the alumni of an institution? Imagine for a moment, just imagine, if the alumni of the great university of Aligarh raise $1 billion, which is simply 7,500 people raising 1 crore each, which is less than the value of a decent 3-bedroom apartment in India that can be willed to the university. One can then go with that endowment to tell the government, thank you. No, thank you for your funding. Will it change the nature of governance at AMU and the nature of AMU that we can build? Can we rejuvenate by building a new institution within a great old one? On this solemn occasion, when we celebrate an educationist and an institution builder in Sir Syed, I am reminded of the words of another great educationist, Tagore. His words that all of us have read before reminds us to affirm our faith in education. How relevant are these words in these times that we live in? He said, where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the world has not broken up into fragments by narrow domestic walls, where words come out from the depth of truth, where tireless striving stretches its arm towards perfection, where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way, into the dreary desert sand of dead habit, into where mind is led forward by thee, into ever-widening thought and action, into the heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. Congratulations to all of you once again for being part of a great institution, the Aligarh Muslim University, as it turns 100. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Chandra Saab. Amazing, amazing, amazing. I don't have any words to express my feelings personally. And before I open the floor for question answer, our moderator, Dr. Rafat Hussain, so please come on the stage or whatever the mechanism is. I'll request Masood Bhai to please put spotlight on Dr. Rafat Hussain Saab. And I will request all the participants who are joining our lecture on the Zoom to either raise their hand or write the question in the chat box, or anyone, and all those people watching on Facebook Live, please write down the question on Facebook. We are continuously monitoring our Facebook page. So your questions will be definitely read and asked to Professor Chandra Saab. Dr. Rafat Hussain Saab, please.
Thank you, Afzal. So as Afzal said, I have been tasked to moderate the question and answer session, and the time allotted is 15 minutes. I am Rafat Hussain, and what a well-researched talk. Wow. That is the difference between a scholarly talk and a political talk. And with that, and Afzal has already told you about how to ask the question. I repeat again. So you can raise digital hand. Those who are watching on Zoom, they can raise the digital hand or put a question in chat box. And the audience on the Facebook can ask question on the Facebook. As Afzal said, we are continuously monitoring that, and it will be based on first come, first serve. So I have a first person asking the question, Dr. Raziuddin. Please go ahead, unmute yourself.
जी पंकज साहब, मैं उर्दू में या हिंदी में बोल सकता हूँ?
जरूर बोल सकते हैं।
बहुत ही जबरदस्त लेक्चर आपका था, so full of substance and we really enjoyed it. मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि इंडिया के एजुकेशन में आपने कहा कि अर्ली टाइम्स में बहुत डेडिकेटेड टीचर्स हुआ करते थे, बहुत सिंपल लाइफ थी, लाइफ स्टाइल थी, बहुत अच्छा पढ़ाया उन, लेकिन इंडिया में जो सबसे ज़्यादा मिसिंग पार्ट है उस पर somehow you didn't put some thoughts कि इंडियन एजुकेशन इवन फ्रॉम द वेरी अर्ली पीरियड, उसमें जो वो इंक्वायरी की और एनालिटिकल इंक्वायरी की जो डेप्थ थी, या उसका इंक्विजिशन की बात जो थी, ये एकदम टोटली मिसिंग थी। आप वेस्ट एजुकेशन वेस्टर्न में जाइए तो वहाँ चैलेंज करते हैं, एग्रेसिव तरीके से चैलेंज करते हैं, थॉट प्रोसेस डेवलप करते हैं, इवन एलिमेंट्री और केजी लेवल पे। तो वहाँ ये कि हमको जो सिखा दिया टीचर्स हम क्वेश्चन नहीं कर सकते। तो आप देखिए ना कि सबसे ज़्यादा एजुकेटेड डिग्री होल्डर जो है पूरे दुनिया में वहीं पे माने जाते हैं, इंडिया, बिकॉज आवर पॉपुलेशन। लेकिन वर्ल्ड क्लास साइंस में, इकोनॉमिक्स में या लिटरेचर में कहीं हम मुकाबला क्यों नहीं करते? यही रीज़न है।
कई रीज़न है राजी साहब। एक बार मुझे 1929 की बीएचयू का प्रोस्पेक्टस देखने को मिला, और वो लिबरल आर्ट्स का एपिटोम था। उसमें ओरिएंटल साइंस एंड आर्ट्स एंड हिस्ट्री एंड जियोलॉजी सब कुछ का मिश्रण था, और उसमें there was no written examination. The entire process was an oral viva, and that was really very thought-provoking, inquiry-driven learning process. ये तो 1950 के बाद जब बहुत ज़्यादा तेजी से एनरोलमेंट बढ़ा, इंस्टीट्यूशंस बढ़े, और इतना बड़ा ये महकमा बन गया कि गवर्नमेंट को कंट्रोल करने का केवल एक ही तरीका था. The only way you can show that you're excellent is by writing an examination. And you can't write an examination which is thought-provoking, inquiry-driven, when there are 10 lakh people who have to write an examination, other than depending on rote memory. And that 50 years of that tradition actually has brought us to this day where you are so right, where our world of inquiry, critical thinking, our ability to question just vanished. And it was also happening the same way in the classrooms. The students were just single way recipients of information coming to them from a teacher, rather than engaging them in this major dialogue and debate, which is crucial. I'm so happy that at this point of time with technology, that information has become so public that the professors can no longer have a competitive advantage that they have information. And I think we will see phenomenal change in times to come.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person is Fazal Bhai. He is raising a real hand, not the digital hand.
There is no digital hand to raise there, actually.
Really? Amir Bhai did. Okay, go ahead, please.
So, Professor Chandra Saab, my name is Fazal Khan, and I'm also a member of this association and reside right here in Washington, D.C. area. My question, I can't see him, Rafat, I see you only.
You change the screen maybe.
No.
Go to the grid. Baba, he can hear you. Go ahead.
I can hear you, Fazal sir.
Okay. Actually, what I was wondering, if you can shed some light that in order to increase the number of education students, there are so many private schools and colleges and universities, they are for profit. And I believe that partly because of that, if not wholly, the standard has gone down because they are only for profit. They have nothing to do with education of the the families are students. Could you shed some light on that?
I think you are factually correct. However, the same is the state of affairs in many of our public institutions also. But I must say one thing, that over the last 10 years, there has been a tightening of much of these schools. I won't say tightening of standards of quality, but tightening in terms 10 to 15 years of many of these malpractices in a very, very strong way. The second thing that has happened, and that's more heartening, as I mentioned, for the first time over the last decade, we are really seeing very serious philanthropy leading to establishment of very high quality private institutions, which I think in times to come, if all go well, will probably emerge as world-class institutions out of India. And I also have a feeling that these will stand as a model as students shift from some of the weaker private institutions to these ones, and will become a model for larger ones to come. So I'm very hopeful in times to come. My biggest problem is not that. My biggest problem is, where do I find high quality faculty? That's a bigger challenge in the country today than anything else.
Thank you so much, Chandra Saab. The next person is Sufyan Beg Saab. Please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening from the Aligarh Muslim University. I am Professor Sufyan Beg. I am a professor of computer engineering and also the chairman of the Alumni Affairs Committee at the Aligarh Muslim University. I must congratulate the speaker for the excellent talk. My quick question would be that in this age of ranking and API scores, you know, the NIRF that we talk about in India, how to stick to quality and not get carried away more by the quantity as such. You know, they're asking for number of publications, number of PhDs guided, you know, so on. Nobody looks into what kind of PhD, even if you look at the citations, you know, there is this gimmick where you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. And that's how the citations go up, the H-index goes up, and the quality ultimately suffers. So how to strike a balance between the two?
No, I think you're so right. You're so right. It's very funny, Beksa, that there are so many institutions who are ranked so high, but are so poor in terms of teaching and learning processes. So I think we may have to create, these are institutional choices. We may have to create internal kind of buffers between the NIRF and us. So if I am not ranked in top 50, it is okay, because at some point of time, the quality of my education and my research and my teaching and learning will show up in many different ways. And this ranking will also have to change. In fact, I was thinking that if this government is sincere about this NEP, the new National Education Policy, then there's no way this kind of ranking system can survive, because it asks for very different way in which you teach and learn. So it has to be an internal decision of the university at this particular juncture to choose a pathway which is towards ensuring learning. And we will have to sacrifice some of this ranking business.
Thank you, Chandra Saab. Chandra Saab, there are so many questions lined up. So I request you to please be brief. And so the next person is Syed Amir Saab.
Dr. Professor Chandra, first of all, I must congratulate you for a very scholarly talk. We all benefited from this. Then I want to ask you about your some very insightful comments you made about the quality of the teachers. It seems that post-independence, the generation of teachers we had was selfless, very capable, didn't have particularly much concern about their appearance. And it seems that the second generation, as you pointed out, is nowhere near India quality what it was. So is there a problem with when the country was under foreign rule, we generated the generation of teachers so admirable, and during the independence, somehow something went wrong and the quality of teaching profession went down. Could it be because the teachers no longer command that kind of respect and they are not looked upon so much by the students and the public? I guess the Indian Administrative Service officers are much better than vice chancellors in terms of public esteem. I will appreciate any comments you have.
A quick comment. I think it's the latter which destroyed the stature of the former. And there have been immense cases of how bureaucracy has completely undermined the educational system and educational leadership. On the first part, I think you will still find very committed teachers. It was more about commitment. The former ones, pre-independence, were probably more inclined towards the idea of India. And while the latter ones actually became building a career in this world. The challenge has been that we have not been able to produce the same good people of earlier times were not able to produce the next generation of very high quality academics. And I think that's really where a failure seems to have happened for a variety of different reasons.
Thank you, Chandra Saab. And there are two questions from the Facebook, and they are similar. One from Bachchan Ali Khan: how the policy decision-making process development be transferred from bureaucrat to academicians, or other words, how to liberate present system from clutches of state officials. This is from Nazir Sheikh. So you can address in one.
Well, I think you've asked a $1 billion question. I really don't have an answer, though I wish it happens. I really don't have an answer. But I wish what you're saying exactly happens. I think unless the larger society becomes very enlightened and starts to think that its future lies in universities, this will not happen.
Okay, the next person is Shahid Jamil. Shahid, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Pankaj. As usual, very nice talk, very enlightening talk. I just have a short comment on what you said about liberal education. When I was a student at AMU in the mid-1970s, as a chemistry honors student, I could still take English literature classes.
Fabulous.
And I learned, I read Animal Farm, I read A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen in my English classes. I don't know if that is even possible at places like AMU today. But we are talking about the 70s, so right. It was not pre-independence.
Right.
You alluded to this, but didn't really talk about inbreeding at our universities.
Right.
And inbreeding usually leads to hiring not your best student, but your most obedient student. So
correct.
Like to hear your comments.
No, so correct. I absolutely agree with you. And this also had many deleterious effects. It also led to regionalism, parochialism within the institution. And you used the right word. You had the obedient student who could come in. And I absolutely subscribe to that view, that until and unless we have a system, and this can't be mandated from above. It has to become a part of the culture of an institution. That unless you go out for a few years and establish yourself, in fact, you will never come back as equal to your professor. They will always treat you like the student. And it has had a very, very major negative impact on Indian institutions. I absolutely agree.
Thank you, Chandra Saab. The next person from Facebook is Hifzur Rahman. Is it possible to apply Rabindranath Tagore's vision to the current system or today's system?
Well, universities are communities of hope. We build hope for a nation, we build hope for society. And so my answer to this is yes, we have no other alternative but to build that vision of freedom of the mind. It might take longer than what we all desire, but it will have to happen. It will have to happen.
Good.
Thank you. The next person from Facebook is Mohammad Fahim, and you have partly answered his question, but let me read it again. Is there a gap between academic research and public policy makers, and what should be done? What should be the role of educational institutions?
Well, sometimes academic institutions are also to be blamed. We live in ivory towers with very little translation of much of what we think and do, even when it is very good, for use by public policy professionals and the bureaucrats. And the day this engagement starts to happen, and we probably understand their needs a little bit better, and they understand what is it that universities can provide, we may have a better way of doing it. And here alumni can work very well, because at the end of the day, the bureaucrats are also alumni of their own institutions. So it's been our failure to engage with such alumni as well.
Okay. Last but not least, Dr. Raziuddin wants to ask another question. Go ahead, Razi bhai.
भाई वो पंकज जी बात उसी पे फिर आके अटक जाती है, जैसे आप तो मैनेजमेंट के आदमी हैं, इंडियन इन्वायरमेंट में जो मैनेजमेंट की स्टाइल होनी चाहिए, ये जो इकोनॉमिक मॉडल है, वो वेस्ट में तो नहीं, जाहिर है उससे नहीं आप टोटली ले सकते। जो इंडियन नोबेल लॉरेट जो यहाँ पे इकोनॉमिक्स में थे, इंडियन हेरिटेज के, उनका भी यही प्रोजेक्ट था जो इंडियन मास पॉवर्टी के ऊपर था। तो आप जैसे लोग जो वहाँ की इकोनॉमिक कंडीशन को जानते हैं, वहाँ की मैनेजमेंट स्टाइल को जानते हैं, क्या कोई इनोवेटिव चीज आप क्रिएट कर पाए? कोई ऐसी चीज जो वहीं का मॉडल हो, नेटिव मॉडल हो, और उस चीज को रिपीट किया जाए इंडियन साइंस पे, इंडियन एकेडमिक्स पे, या ऑलवेज इट हैज टू कम फ्रॉम वेस्ट?
No, I think there are lots of models and lots of experiments in India which are very, very Indian in nature. But the power of modern science is that it is no longer Western or Eastern. Science is about search of truth. And आप तो खुद ही scientist हैं. So I mean the magic is, how do we use the knowledge system that is there around the world, and how do we deploy it, modify it, and make something in India which then grows to become a global model. And this is a very common thought which is said in India. If any new innovation can scale in India, I think it will scale and be of value around the world, whether it is low-cost housing, whether it is water sanitation, whether it is sustainability, and so on and so forth. So, मुझे लगता है कि we should not get caught in that that dialogue. But the thing is, how do we go about addressing our contextual and cultural questions or context with the best of knowledge anywhere in the world, for that matter, today, including ours. But we can't be always takers. We have to become givers of that knowledge, which somewhere we've gotten lost.
That's what it is. Yeah. Thank you.
Which is probably what you're trying to say.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Thank you so much. One last question from anyone. That's okay. Afzal Usmani has a right to ask a question. Okay, this is the last question, please.
So thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Pankaj Chandra Saab, for an amazing talk. I will
Pleasure.
have a quick, simple question. Basically, very recently we have the National Educational Policy came by the government of India. So how that is going to affect in a good way or bad way, if you shed some light on that aspect, we'll be basically ready to know that. So just know your.
Let me just make one or 2 points, because evaluating or commenting on national policy would require, and I would love to do that at some other occasion, really an hour. But 2 or 3 things have happened. One is, the positive part is that it has for the first time broken a certain mindset in Indian higher education that we cannot do this or we cannot do that. And I believe in that there is a certain positive element to it. It also brings together the primacy of a university. It's interesting that we really revere our IITs and IIMs and other standalone institutions. And these are being asked now in the new national education policy to become multidisciplinary and almost like a university. So the primacy of university, which is multidisciplinary, is now really being recognized as something that is essential for the society. So that's a second, in my mind, very important recognition. The third is it talks about multidisciplinarity and autonomy. The key issue is autonomy. I think autonomy for institutions to be able to make the choices that they make so that anybody can experiment. And that is very desirable. At least it has been raised very strongly. The affiliation system has been removed. They're asking it to be removed, and unitary institutions have to come. But the challenge lies in its implementation. It's the same we are asking. In order to implement the national education policy, we will have to dismantle all bureaucracy, all power of bureaucrats, the UGC and many other systems that have stymied our institutions. The question is whether they will allow it to happen. And I think that's really where the key issue lies. If we can remove and destroy that structure, I think we may have very fresh way of looking at Indian higher education, which is very different at this juncture.
Thank you, Chandra Saab. Afzal, before I pass the ball back to you, you were monitoring the Facebook questions. I think I covered all of them. Is there anyone I missed? Because I don't want to annoy anyone.
No, looks like most of the questions.
I think I covered everything, and my apologies if I missed anyone. And back to you, Afzal.
Thank you, Rafat Bhai, and thank you, Professor Chandra Saab, for amazing talk and the answers to the questions raised by the audience and participants. And before going to the official vote of thanks, I would also like to recognize few people and appreciate and thank, especially my senior, Dr. Syed Jameel Saab, who basically recommended your name and basically also attended the lecture. It's very pleasure to have Syed Bhai with us. Thank you, Syed Bhai, for joining. And also to Professor Sufyan Beg Saab, who is the chairman of the MU Alumni Affairs Committee in Aligarh Muslim University. Thanks, Sufyan Bhai, for joining the talk. And also, I would like to thank MU Public Relation Officer, MU PRO, Umar Pirzada, who's a good friend of mine. So thanks, Umar, for joining the lecture. And I will request our Secretary-elect, Mohammad Javeed, to please come and say thanks to everybody. Javeed Bhai.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Aligarh Alumni Association, Washington, DC, I thank Professor Pankaj Chandra for an amazing scholarly and enlightening lecture on how Indian universities have evolved over past 100 years. I thank and acknowledge Dr. Syed Jameel, Professor Sufyan Beg, and Mr. Umar Pirzada for giving us their precious time today. I congratulate Corona warriors on being recognized for their grit and determination in fighting the coronavirus pandemic. I also thank and congratulate Mr. Rafat Hussain for moderating an amazing Q&A session today. And lastly, I thank all the volunteers, participants, and attendees from all over the world in joining us today and making this event a success. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jayad Bhai. After that, as per the tradition, we'll have the Aligarh Muslim University Tarana, and I will request Masood Bhai to please start the Tarana. Yeah, he's starting the audio. So this is the flyer for our incoming Mushaira, which is going to happen on 31st of October. Same time, and I will request all who is watching on Facebook and Zoom to attend this event. This event will also be live broadcasted on the same web page, same Facebook page. So Masood Bhai, start the Tarana, please. Thank you. Masood Bhai,
Are you there, Masood Bhai?
he's sharing the screen, so he should be there. Inko glitch to nahi ho gaya. Otherwise, I can start.
Okay, so can you show the English version also, please? Do you have an English version?
Ji Masood Bhai hai, Masood Bhai.
No, for the Mushaira. Yes. Great. Thank you, Masood Bhai.
Masood Bhai, audio play kar dein.
है